According to a study by the National Gardening Association, over 70% of gardeners admit that maintaining a vibrant garden throughout the year is a challenge. The changing seasons, unpredictable weather, and the specific care each plant needs make it difficult to achieve the dream of a colorful, blooming garden in every season. It's a problem that affects not only novice gardeners, but also those with years of experience. That's exactly where my struggle began. My name is Sarah, and I'm 42 years old. Growing up, my grandmother had the most beautiful garden you could imagine. She called it her year-round oasis, and no matter when I visited, it was always bursting with life. Summer brought tall sunflowers that seemed to touch the sky, spring dazzled with tulips and daffodils, and even winter, which felt like the time for everything to hibernate, had patches of evergreen plants and red berries that seemed to defy the cold. It was magical. When my grandmother passed, I made a promise to myself that I would recreate that same vibrant, ever-blooming paradise in my own backyard. But I had no idea just how hard it would be. At first, I was filled with excitement. I spent hours poring over gardening blogs and flipping through magazines, imagining what my garden could look like. I bought seed packets and young plants, full of optimism. I dreamed of a place where the colors would change with the seasons, where I could escape from the stresses of life and be surrounded by nature's beauty. But my dream quickly turned into a nightmare. Spring started out well enough. I managed to plant a decent assortment of tulips and daffodils, just like I remembered from my grandmother's garden. They bloomed beautifully, and for a while, I thought I had this gardening thing figured out. But as soon as the summer heat rolled in, things began to unravel. The bright greens and yellows of my spring garden started to fade. The once vibrant flowers wilted, their petals crumbling in my hands as I tried desperately to save them. I couldn't understand it. What was I doing wrong? I started to spend more time in the garden, watering, pruning, and researching what could possibly be going wrong. But the more I tried to fix things, the worse they got. By the time summer was in full swing, my garden was a graveyard of shriveled plants and dried out soil. It felt like a reflection of my own growing frustration. That summer, I found myself sitting in the middle of my lifeless garden, tears streaming down my face. The garden that was supposed to bring me peace and joy had become a constant reminder of my failure. It wasn't just the heat that was making me feel weighed down, it was the disappointment. I had let my grandmother down, and more than that, I had let myself down. I would stare out of my kitchen window, looking at the dry patches and bare soil, wondering how something so simple could have gone so wrong. When fall arrived, I was hesitant to try again. But I convinced myself that maybe the problem was the summer heat, maybe fall would bring some relief. So, I started over. I planted chrysanthemums, asters, and marigolds, thinking they would be hardy enough to handle the cooler temperatures. But, just as I started to feel hopeful, an early frost swept through, killing off nearly everything I had worked to grow. The vibrant reds, oranges, and purples I had hoped to see that season never came. Instead, I was left with brown, shriveled remnants of what was supposed to be my autumn garden. Winter was the worst. I had always known that keeping a garden alive in the cold months would be difficult, but I wasn't prepared for just how bleak it would feel. The few evergreen shrubs I had planted seemed to struggle against the harsh winds, and I could barely stand to go outside and look at them. I would sit inside, watching the snow pile up, feeling the weight of my failure pressing down on me. The garden was supposed to be a place where I could find solace, but instead, it had become a symbol of everything I couldn't control. There were times I considered giving up entirely. I felt like a fraud for even thinking I could create something as beautiful as my grandmother's garden. Every time I drove past someone else's perfectly manicured yard, I felt a pang of jealousy and shame. How were they making it look so effortless while I struggled through every season, never seeming to get it right? I started avoiding the garden altogether. Every attempt I made only seemed to end in disappointment, and the weight of that disappointment was becoming too much to bear. My friends would ask me how my garden was doing, and I would smile and lie, telling them that it was coming along, when in reality, it felt like a hopeless project. The breaking point came one spring morning, 2 years into my gardening journey. I had tried again, planting a new batch of tulips and daffodils, hoping that this time would be different. But when I went outside to check on them, I found that most of them had been destroyed by an unexpected frost the night before. I stood there, staring at the frozen petals, and something inside me broke. I had poured so much of myself into this dream, and yet I was standing in the same place as when I had started, with nothing to show for it. I remember collapsing to the ground, my hands digging into the cold, hard soil as I cried. The frustration, the sense of failure, the hopelessness, it all came crashing down on me at once. I had tried so hard, but no matter what I did, it never seemed to be enough. All I wanted was to create something beautiful, something that would live on beyond me, just like my grandmother's garden. But instead, I was left with a barren yard and the feeling that I would never be able to achieve that dream. For a while, I thought about giving up on gardening altogether. Maybe I wasn't cut out for it. Maybe the dream of a vibrant, year-round garden was just that, a dream. Something that other people could achieve, but not me. I carried that weight with me for a long time. Every time I walked past the garden, I would feel a knot in my chest, a reminder of everything I had failed to create. It became harder and harder to look at, and eventually, I stopped even trying to fix it. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there had to be a way to make it work. There had to be a way to create the garden I had dreamed of, a garden that would thrive in every season, no matter the challenges. Even as I struggled, I held on to the hope that one day, I would find a solution. But for now, all I had was the pain of watching my dream wither away. And that's where my journey took a turn, but not before I had reached the lowest point in my gardening struggle. I was lost in the chaos of seasons, overwhelmed by the demands of each plant and the changing weather. All I could see were the mistakes, the dead flowers, and the cold, lifeless garden that seemed to mock my efforts at every turn. As I sat there in my lifeless garden, broken by yet another failure, I knew I had to make a choice, either give up on my dream or find a way to turn things around. And so, I decided to try again. But this time, I knew I needed to approach it differently. I couldn't just plant flowers and hope for the best. I had to truly understand the complexities of seasonal gardening. The first step I took was simple but necessary. I educated myself on the specific needs of each plant I was growing. I learned that different flowers thrive in different conditions. Some needed full sunlight, while others preferred shade. Some required constant watering while others needed just enough moisture to survive. I also realized that the timing of planting mattered just as much as the care I gave them. One of the biggest revelations I had was that preparing the soil before each season was essential. I had been neglecting the foundation of my garden, and it became clear that poor soil health was one of the main reasons my flowers couldn't thrive through the changing seasons. Next, I sought advice from local gardening communities. Joining a gardening group gave me access to a wealth of knowledge from people who had been gardening for decades. They taught me about companion planting, a technique that allows plants to support each other's growth, which was something I had never considered before. For example, planting marigolds next to my tomatoes helped keep pests away naturally, reducing the need for chemical pesticides. I also learned about mulching and how it could protect my garden beds during the colder months, helping to retain moisture and regulate soil temperature. Another major shift in my approach was planning for each season instead of just reacting to problems as they arose. I started using a seasonal planting calendar, which became a game changer. This calendar allowed me to map out when and where I would plant my flowers so that they could transition smoothly from one season to the next. I began to stagger my planting cycles, ensuring that as one set of flowers started to fade, another would take its place. By doing this, I managed to create a seamless flow of color and life in my garden. But it wasn't just about plants and soil, it was about learning how to care for them as the seasons changed. In the fall, I would prepare my garden for winter by trimming back dead plants and adding a layer of mulch to protect the roots from the cold. During the summer, I learned to water in the early morning to avoid the harsh midday sun scorching the leaves. And in the spring, I made sure to feed my plants with organic fertilizers, giving them the nutrients they needed to grow strong. Still, it wasn't an overnight transformation. There were setbacks, but the progress was undeniable. Slowly but surely, my garden began to change. Instead of dead patches and barren soil, I saw lush greenery and vibrant blooms. The tulips that once withered in the spring now stood tall and proud, and the asters I had planted for the fall burst into color right on schedule. I finally began to experience the joy that my grandmother must have felt every time she walked through her year-round oasis. The feeling of accomplishment was overwhelming. There were moments when I thought back to those times of failure, when my garden was nothing more than a graveyard of dead plants, and I could hardly believe how far I'd come. The turning point for me wasn't just learning new techniques. It was realizing that gardening is a process that requires patience, planning, and a little bit of trial and error. But there was one tool that truly made the biggest difference in my journey: the book titled Bloom Boom: Design a Vibrant Flower Garden for Every Season. This book gave me the guidance I had been searching for all along. It was filled with detailed, easy-to-follow steps that showed me exactly how to create a garden that could bloom beautifully through every season. From planting seasonal plants to soil preparation, and even tips on how to manage pests, the book covered it all. Following the advice in the book, I learned how to take my garden from a seasonal struggle to a year-round success. If you're watching this and feeling the same frustration I once felt, wondering if you'll ever have that dream garden, don't lose hope. The journey can be hard, but with the right help, it's absolutely possible. This book was my game changer, and I know it can be yours too. If you want to transform your garden and finally create that vibrant, blooming space you've always dreamed of, I highly recommend grabbing a copy of Bloom Boom: Design a Vibrant Flower Garden for Every Season. You can get the digital version right now at Librify.com, just click the link in the description. Trust me, it will change everything.
The stars begin to weep, fading dreams of what could be, lost in time like waves.